a lot of the questions I have is from the afterword, although I do have some stuff about the novel itself. But in your afterword, you bring up the January 6th incident, and was did this play a role in the development of this novel, or was this something that happened after you wrote it and you felt you needed to confront it?
It happened after. I started the book about 2.5 years before those events. And it's other people who have pointed out that aspects of the novel reflect what's going on today. And of course, I wrote the afterwards after I wrote the novel, after it was all done. But that attempted coup, as I call it, echoes a lot of the words of the American Revolution. It was not accidental. And the notion of who's a patriot and who's not. I think it was Samuel Johnson who said, patriotism is the last refuge of a scoundrel. I sort of like that notion. And so, yeah, a number of people have pointed out similarities, but that was in no sense in my mind as I wrote the book.
Yeah, I one of the things you mentioned was, and I had no idea, was that the divisions in families back then are pretty much what they have been since 2016, where
Right.
people in the same nuclear household are on complete opposite ends of the spectrum. Like Ben Franklin's kid was
Right.
for the king. I had no idea.
But he was more than, like, Franklin's son was the royal governor of New Jersey. He was captured at one point by the revolutionaries. He was imprisoned, I think, in Connecticut. And he was released upon promising he would not take arms against the new colonies. But he did, and he led military actions against the radicals. So, I mean, it was not just, as you say, within the family, but this was a violent. And Franklin, Benjamin Franklin, who's a remarkable person in his own right, never forgave his son. He was a man who, Franklin was, who progressed and changed over his years, fascinating man, but he would never forgive his son, ever. So it's an interesting story.
Do you
Somebody
think?
should write a joint biography of the two of them, actually. It would make a good book.
Yeah, it would. It'd be something I'd read. Do you think it's possible for? I mean, it just always seems so bleak, especially with the whole Supreme Court things that have been coming out, decisions that have been coming out. Do you see a path to healing for this country? Like Ben Franklin didn't speak to his kid again, and I would hate for that to happen with the families that aren't talking to each other now.
Correct. Um, Let me be a bit naive and suggest if people started to reading again, the demise of newspapers, I think, has had a catastrophic effect on the social fabric of this country. The dependency on media for information has been catastrophic. I find that people lack information, knowledge, ways of thinking. I think that's partly led to where we are today. So reading, let's get everyone to read.
Yeah, I read an interview with Tina Fey some years ago, where she had been asked what's one book that people should read right after Trump was elected, and she'd recommended Leni Riefenstahl's biography.
Really?
Yeah. So I ended up reading it as a result of that, and I'm like, damn, this is
Why?
horrifying. This is horrifying.
Oh,
It's just like an insider's view of just kind of how Germany just went to shit.
I see. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Pardon my French. As you mentioned too, like the population during the Revolution era was separated into thirds: for the revolution, against the revolution, and indifferent people. And I feel like it's still kind of like that. There's a lot of indifferent people.
Yeah, that's a traditional way of looking at it. I've never seen whether anybody really, I'm sure, but maybe I just don't know, anyone really researched that. And let it be said that when people talk about that broken into thirds, they almost always are neglecting three factors in the population: women, enslaved people, and indentured people who were sort of halfway slaves. And for example, among blacks, enslaved peoples, most of them, particularly in the South, were in favor of the British because the British had offered them freedom if they would come to their side. And by the other token, same side of the token, other side, Southern elites were in favor of the revolution because it would keep things as the status quo. So it's in one of my books, is one of my favorite lines is from that book, Catch You Later, Traitor. And a father is trying to explain to his son, he said, Thomas Jefferson wrote, all men are created equal. They're endowed by their creator, et cetera, et cetera. And we all know those phrases. But Jefferson owned slaves. So the father says to the son, it's complicated. If you know that things are complicated, you've learned half the philosophy of the world. I agree with that. Things are not simple. They're never simple. I guess that's my wisdom of the ages.